today's Ask the Rabbi session. As always, we are here live to answer questions, and the questions are also posed in the chat. We're trying to have a daytime session today, so hopefully that goes over well. If not, we'll go back to another time. But anyway, we're here. And so those of you who can join for a little bit, great. So today's the first question that we got in the WhatsApp discussion group. It was a question about I'll just read it over here. I would love a good in-depth discussion about Ben Yomo and Eno Ben Yomo. I always feel confident in it until someone starts asking questions, and then I feel like I doubt my understanding. This factor really only comes into play when calibrating a possible mistake/kashrut issue, right? Is one permitted to utilize this factor if you are in need of another or an additional utensil? So that was the first question. So let's go over some of the factors that contribute to this question, because it's a lot. So let's unpack it and then let's go over it. So number one, when it comes to judging the status of a utensil's kashrut, the thing we have to look at is how long has it been since the utensil was last used. So the Torah basically states that all flavors have to be tasty flavors, and that they have to be of some value. I mean, they have to be of some enjoyment to you. And if a flavor is not of enjoyment to you, that flavor is not prohibited. This is discussed in depth in the Gemara in a few places, and is really beyond the scope of an Ask the Rabbi class. But just know that this is something that is a Torah level issue. So we take the approach, meaning we, having gone through millennia of looking at the issue, have decided that when a flavor has sat in the walls of a utensil, after 24 hours, that flavor is considered to have become rather unflavorful. The term is referred to as pagum in Hebrew. The flavor is ruined or rendered somewhat nullified. The reason why that's important is because were you to go ahead and take that utensil and cook it and use it for the cooking of food, the flavor that is held inside of the utensil would affect the quality and the status of the food being cooked inside. So, for example, if on Monday you cook some milk inside of a pot, let's say you cook the milk in there because you want to have a hot cup of milk. So you take, let's say, a pot that holds a few cups in it. You put a couple of cups of milk into it. You warm it, so you don't burn the milk right on the stove top. And it starts to bubble up. It goes above the temperature of what's known as Yad Soledespo, which is about 104 degrees. It goes above that temperature, and actually the milk starts to boil a little bit. You see the bubbles. Now it's good hot milk, and you want to have a nice cup of hot milk. Great. You take the hot milk and you pour it in a cup. Okay, perfect. You label this pot, and it says that it's dairy, and now you wash it out and you put it away. It's good night. Someone the next day unknowingly takes your dairy pot, and they're not paying attention to it, and they decide to take some ground beef and cook it in that pot. Okay, so it's within 24 hours of its last use, and they go ahead and cook the beef in that pot. While there is no actual milk present, the Torah tells us that the flavors in the pot render the dairy flavor as something that is of value going into the meat, and therefore the meat that is in that pot, cooked in that pot, will now become prohibited as basar b'chalav, as meat being cooked in milk. Although you can't see the actual milk, the flavor of the milk is there, and that is a prohibition of the Torah to cook like that. Okay, and so therefore the meat becomes a Torah prohibited item. Let's say you did the same thing, but it wasn't on Tuesday, but instead you have your same milk pot cooked on Monday, and you do the same act on Wednesday. Well, on Wednesday, if you did it by accident, you're not realizing it, right? You ignore the fact that there's dairy on the pot, and the pot's blue, and you're not paying attention. And trust me, I've been to people's houses where especially if people grew up their whole lives never actually using the kitchen, right? And you heat up your chicken soup in that pot. So on that second day, bidi eved, okay, so you didn't do it intentionally, the chicken soup would be fine. However, the pot now becomes prohibited from use until you kosher that pot. That is a classic case of ben yomo versus eno ben yomo. Ben yomo means the flavor is of some value and prohibits the food as basar b'chalav, whereas if it's eno ben yomo, the food becomes permitted. The food status remains as permitted, and the utensil becomes prohibited. The utensil becomes prohibited rabbinically, and therefore you must kosher it. However, if you went ahead and decided that you were just going to wait 24 hours and use the pot regularly, there actually is a reason to say that the food should be prohibited to you because of a general principle known as ein mevatlin iser lechatchila. One is not permitted to go ahead and nullify prohibited substances ipso facto, just because I want to and not follow. The rules are you have to have designated pots for meat and for milk, okay? Or you have to kosher them in between. The minhag is not to kosher in between because of a possibility of making a mistake. So that is part of the issue in using it that way. So that's why the minhag is to mark things for dairy and for meat. They should be used for that singular purpose. That's the main use of eno ben yomo. So that's when you would apply it, as in that case. However, I generally recommend that you call your LOR, your local Orthodox rabbi, or you can always call me if I'm not local, or any other person who knows these rules, because there's a lot of things that go into consideration. Because sometimes it's not that you cooked it in the pot, but sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. I took a spoon, that's normally dairy, and I stuck it in a meat soup, and I did this, I did that. There's a lot of permutations, a lot of usage of it, but that is sort of the classic case of eno ben yomo. And just to review that again, eno ben yomo basically means that it's been more than 24 hours since I used the opposite type of flavor. Meat going to milk, or milk going to meat. Even though it will allow you to consume the food if it's eno ben yomo, there's a lot more that goes into it. Even if it's ben yomo, for example, if you take a meat spoon, right, and you are cooking your milk, and you dip the spoon into the milk and you're stirring it around, even if the spoon is ben yomo, it's entirely possible that the milk could still be permitted based on the volume of spoon that goes into the milk itself. So it's not 100% one way or the other. It's one of the considerations and one of the factors that helps to determine the possibility of prohibition or the possibility of permission one way or the other. So it's one of the factors that contributes to it. So it's something to know about. But it's definitely important information. And I want to follow this up with saying that when you are collecting information to ask a question about the kosher status of the food, you need a few important facts to deliver to the rabbi to make sure that they make a proper decision. There may also be other follow-up information as well. So you always want to make sure that you have information that is pertinent, which would be the type of flavor for which the heated food was in, the utensil that it was in, the other affected utensil. So I was cooking in a dairy pot and I inserted a meat spoon and the food was parve, right? The status of the food is important. Was the food parve? Was it dairy? Was it meat? What's the status of the thing that was introduced in there? What's the status of the pot, right? Also, where did I put it? Was it in the original pot that I cooked it in? Did I put it in another type of utensil afterwards? That affects the status of it as well. So if it's not in the original utensil in which it was cooked, instead it was transferred to another utensil. So keep track of think of it like evidence you'd have to present in court. I need to keep track of where my food is going to maintain the kosher status of it. So it's a chain of kashrus. All right, so you gotta keep the chain of kashrus. You must always defend the kashrus of the items. Okay, so that you have to make sure that those are all pertinent parts of information. And sometimes other things could be taken into consideration as well. Did you heat it in a microwave? Was it over the fire? Was it on an electric thing? Did you put it in the oven? Was it being cooked in liquid? Was it completely dry? There's a lot of factors. So make sure you have all of your facts lined up for presenting the case to your rabbi. So with that, no, unfortunately, as one person asked here, you could be a rabbi from these 10 minutes talking about it, but you definitely are well on your way. I will say that generally speaking, most rabbis for regular smicha, they only learn about the kashrut of pots and pans. And when I used to speak to these older rabbanim who have since been nifter, Aleichem Hashalom, they used to all talk about that. When you got smicha in Europe, you were incredibly well learned. You learned how to do shchita. You learned, the pots and pans stuff. But that was because back then you had one pot and one pan. You didn't have a whole kitchen. People were very poor. So the kasha of the pots and pans was a huge, big difference. He said they used to learn how to know if a Sefer Torah was kosher or not. They used to, all kinds of very important information. They were very, very well trained. But but because of the need for many rabbis in Europe at one point, they made it very easy to get smicha, just to call you rabbi, and that tradition has been upheld. So it's really important to know that the rabbi has been trained in a lot of fields. So it's important to make sure that those things are a person's knowledgeable in all those different situations. Okay, here's a question. I have a long-running debate about if a person can wear a fitness tracker on Shabbat. And does it make a difference if it is a watch or a different item that is completely passive? So the follow-up to that is, in my case, I wear a ring with no muksa that I can take off anyway. There are a number of different answers to this question. So if the tracker is automated and has no change, just collecting data, that can be fine according to some, because you're not making a change. Okay, so this is a great question. I actually had this conversation with another Rav a few years ago. I think it was called Whoop. Whoop. And Whoop, basically, the way that it worked was it was a passive tracker. It just collected the data, and that type of stuff seems to not be a problem because it's not anything noticeable that you are doing. It just passively collects the information and stores it on the device. So you're not really doing anything. It's just collecting information about you. As long as you're not doing anything and you're not causing anything to happen, that's different. So, for example, if I take my Apple Watch or I take my phone and I activate the running tracker or the walking tracker, every time I take a step, I'm activating the device and it's tracking that information. So if I walk with it, I turn it on. So, and everything that I do causes that. Interestingly enough, that was part of the issue with things like infrared sensors that a lot of rabbis had issues with, which is that everything that I do that causes an action, I'm ultimately responsible for it. And this isn't really found so obviously in the case of laws of Shabbos, but they're found in a lot of cases of tort law in Jewish law. I'm going for a walk and I trip over your stuff. Am I liable or are you liable? Well, if you have permission to put your stuff there, then me being a person who's just not paying attention, and I trip over your stuff, I have damaged your property for just being unaware of my surroundings. But if you put them out in the sidewalk and I trip over them, unless for some reason you have permission to put them in the sidewalk, which doesn't really make sense, my tripping over them meant that you were causing damage to me. And if I hurt myself, you'd be liable because you left them there. And that's actually those are called cases that are similar to called where I basically leave something out there that's kind of ownerless, but if I put it there and you trip on it or you fall into it, even though I don't really own it, since I put my effort into creating that hazard, I'm responsible for it, even if I'm not the owner of it. So if I just call my action, it translates back to me. Okay, so the fitness trackers, if they are passive and they just listen for things that happen in your body regularly, even though your activity will change some of those things, it's pretty passive. You're not doing anything to it, and therefore those things are okay. But to do active trackers that track your steps, track your this, and track your that, would potentially be problematic. The question is, what if you don't see anything happening and it just tracks the information? You're not actually getting any live information out of it. That may still be okay, even if it was doing fitness tracking. It was tracking your heart rate as opposed to tracking your steps. So if it tracks your steps, the device is meant to track every time you have contact. It looks to feel for those things like pedometers. Those type of items would be problematic. But if it's just tracking your heart rate and your overall your overall passive body movements to give you some feedback on it, that would be okay. Okay, but not to use things like Strava or the Health or Apple Health, those type of things that track your stuff. Okay. So, and if it's a watch, it's functional, so it wouldn't be muksa. But even the rings are also, types of jewelry are okay too, because once they're considered jewelry, if it's a ring, if it's a band, if it's some type of jewelry, that's not considered muksa. It's considered jewelry, and it's considered a kli. It's considered a useful utensil, and it's not muksa. Here's the next question. Share Halacha, Feldheim, by Rabbi Zev Greenwald, chapter 37, mitzvot dependent on the land of Israel. As we call them, mitzvos hatluyos va'aretz. Okay, mitzvos that only take place in the land of Israel. So very confusing for me is separating Truma Gedola and Maaser Rishon from fresh whole fruits. Real world situation, I might have just 4 apples grouped together. One apple would have to provide the 1% and the 10% of apple flesh for the lot, but that apple would now be unfit to serve or store. How is such a thing actually performed in such a case? Okay, so the word provide was corrected. So I'm not sure what you mean, but generally speaking, that's what you would do with that specific apple would be okay. You just have to just cut out the parts that you're not going to use, and that's for Meiser Rishon and Sheni. That's for Truma and Maaser Rishon. So let's unpack that a little bit. When fruits are grown in the land of Israel, they are obligated to 3 types of tithes in order to permit them for consumption. They have to take what's known as Truma Gedola. So that is the tithe that is taken out, which was given to the Kohanim. That's anywhere between 1/40th to 1/60th of the product. That's the mention of the 1% on here. And then there was the Maaser Rishon, the actual original tithe, which was 10% of the produce. And then there was Maaser Sheni. Maaser Sheni was the produce being taken from the land of Israel. And in some years, that's Maaser Ani. Okay, so every 3rd year, that becomes the tithe that you don't keep for yourself, but that you give to the poor in Israel. So the question is, it shouldn't be unfit to serve. You have to simply take out the part that would be for Truma and for Maaser. You don't have to ruin the whole apple for it. Okay, so if you have 4 apples, if you took 10% of those 4 apples, you would just have to make a slice out of 1 apple. So if you cut 1 apple, basically, if you cut a slice off of it and when you say the nusach, when you say the paragraph for separating Truma in the Sidur, you would simply say, I'm marking this spot over here for Truma, and the spot immediately next to it should be designated as Maaser Rishon. You can cut that off and then put that aside, and you have to let that rot, and then you can go ahead and consume the rest. In Israel, it's always better just to get the produce that says that the Rabbanut has certified that they have taken Truma Maaser from it. It makes it much easier. It's the stuff that gets exported that the Rabbanut hasn't taken any responsibility for. It's Truma and Maaser, and also Shemitah. So those are something that are different issues when they come to the U.S. So or to other places of Hutzaretz. So those things are problematic. But so those are things that you should be concerned about. But those other parts of it, you can just cut it off and put it away. Okay. All right. Everybody should be okay with all that. All right. So that is that. Those are some of the questions I got in there. Did I get any of the chat here? I was not paying attention to the chat. Okay, we get any of the chat over here. So let's look at some other questions that I had. Other questions that I had recently are. Some of them are pretty straightforward. What happens if I don't say Havdalah on Motzei Shabbat? If I have until Tuesday night to say them, until the sunset of Tuesday to say it. What do I say? The answer is you just say the Borei Pri Hagafen and Hamavdil Makor Shechol. You don't do fire, and you don't do spices. You don't do fire because the fire was a gift from Hashem to Adam to show him that he was there with him after Shabbat. So even though fire was not permitted on Shabbat, after Shabbat, it was permitted, and that was part of God's gift to Adam. But if it's not after Shabbos anymore, it's not a gift. So if you do it Sunday or Monday, the Havdalah doesn't do that. And also, the spices are for the extra spirit of Shabbos, which departs immediately Motzei Shabbos. So if you delayed Havdalah, you don't do that. So that's why, for example, when we delay Havdalah, when Tisha B'Av falls out on Saturday night, Motzei Shabbos, you do Havdalah so you can drink the wine on Sunday night, and you just skip the fire and you skip the spices. So that was that question. I had a couple of other interesting questions over here. Let's see here real quick. Here's one that was quite fun. This was an interesting question. That is not like a halacha question, but it was a parsha question. So I'll just throw this one in, and then we'll see if there's any other questions. Otherwise, we'll probably wrap up for today. So, interesting question was, by the wonder, one of the signs by which Hashem was going to display to the Egyptians and to the Jewish people that Moses was his prophet to redeem them. One of the wonders was to have the stick that Moshe was holding turn into a serpent. What's interesting though is that when it's by the burning bush case, the serpent is referred to as Nachash in Hebrew. And so Moshe sees the Nachash and he jumps back, like it's going to bite him, and it's called Nachash at the time. But when Aaron performs the miracle in front of Pharaoh, the stick becomes a tanin. It becomes the Hebrew word changes. What's interesting is that Rashi says that tanin is a Nachash by Aaron. Okay, so according to Rashi, it's no big deal. Tanin, Nachash, they're synonyms. But if you look at the actual use of the words, you find that it's only called Nachash by Moshe, and it's called a Tanin by Aharon. So what's pshat with that? So in the Targum, it says they're all the same, and according to Rashi, the translation is all the same. It's just a snake. There's two words for a snake. However, Rashi quotes the Midrash by the burning bush and says the reason why the stick turned into a snake was to teach Moshe that he was saying Lashon Hara about the Jewish people. And that's why it turned into a Nachash only for him. So that's why when it refers to Moshe and the mateh and the staff, for him it's always a Nachash. It links him back to the Lashon Hara he spoke. Who else spoke Lashon Hara? Well, the actual snake himself, the original serpent of the Garden of Eden. But we know that in Bereshis, Tanin and Nachash are used in two different places. The Nachash is in the Garden of Eden, and the Tanin is created on the second day, Tanim Gedolim. So the Targum Onkelos actually translates Tanin differently, and it translates it as Char Manya, Chet Mem Reish Nun Yud Nun. So I had to look up. I don't know what this word means. And so I had to go look up in other contexts, and it seems to refer to a different type of creature, and the possibilities are that it's the basilisk lizard, not the basilisk from Harry Potter. Those who think that. So when I was giving the answer first, I was like, Harry Potter basilisk? I'm like, no, basilisk. It refers to a type of serpent, type of lizard. So by Aharon, it turns into a different type of creature than it does by Moshe. So the Tanin becomes a different type of creature altogether, and is often used in other contexts. The word, the Aramaic word itself, is used a few times conjunctively with the snake to refer to a venomous snake. So meaning that the Nachash, his damage was through Lashon Hara, whereas the Tanin, his damage is through the venom itself. So meaning that the snake of Aharon was more of a representation of the power of Hashem. And what's also really fascinating about it is that, as Rashi points out, the staff swallows their staff, and not the snake swallows their snakes. The miracle was that his basilisk-looking staff came and swallowed up the other staffs, and that's why it became even more impressive. So even though they were able to make that recreation, but the reason why the words are different is not because Tanin is necessarily, as according to Rashi, is that it is a synonym for Nachash. It's that it actually is always referring to the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't believe the Jews would believe him, and that was the Lashon Hara he spoke about them. If there's no further questions, we will wrap up class with that for today. And let's see if anybody else had anything really quickly last minute. Okay, no, they're not. Okay, well, thank everyone for coming out today. Class will be posted in about 24 hours once it goes through the whirlpool of YouTube and then gets left up for all eternity for everyone to enjoy. And once again, thank you for joining. Feel free to post more questions for the next time we have class. Cult.